It's become an industry which, in the United States, for instance, has replaced the war machine. Rather than directing the resources to fighting a war outside of the country, they're directing the resources to building institutions of social control, which are managing those people who could be non-conformists within their own community.
The first touch is a shock. If you are silly enough, the second touch, you're dead.
Australia is a wonderful market. Recently, we developed a new machine, and it is actually designed to do penal searches. It is called the PC, or Pecker Checker.
People have said, it's happening in America, it must be positive, it's a private sector, let's just introduce it and see what happens. What we found in Australia is that the private sector has not promoted competition, it's promoted greater secrecy, it's promoted less flow of information, it's led to concealment.
CCA offers what we call a full package arrangement. We can provide design, construction, obviously management, which is our core business, and also finance if governments wish to go down that track.
We provide true support, point-to-point interaction based in Miami, Florida to anywhere in the world.
The issue of crime and punishment is a very local issue, and by us contracting it out to overseas people, it's as if we're washing our hands of it, and it's as if we can McDonaldise prisons like you can fast food.
We have a number of facilities in Australia now that are privatised.
Does that keep the public sector workers in line?
It does, yeah.
Sort of
I mean, one of the nice things about that's right. It's brought competition into the industry, which it's never had for 200 years.
One protester tried to block the Premier's car and others threw blood money at him as he arrived to open Raven Hall.
Yesterday, Victoria's first private prison opened for business. Raven Hall in Deer Park will house 125 women prisoners, replacing the old Fairley complex.
We are committed to ensuring that every possible opportunity is provided for all women in this centre.
This new women's prison is operated and owned by the private contractor, the Corrections Corporation of Australia, so removing the risk from government, a risk that we are obviously trying to minimise in the way in which we manage the affairs of this state in a whole range of areas.
The public system, you knew where you stood. It was consistent. It was like you knew what to expect. If you did something, you knew what you were going to end up copying. Whereas here, it's different rules for different fools.
I think the private jails, it's going to explode because of the frustration. Like every day, there is some type of frustration because of inconsistency with rules. There'll just be a build-up.
It's a private prison. The conditions are different. You never had these things in Pentridge.
What's going on? Playing cards, huh? Any room for another one to jump in?
You never had a shower in your cell in Pentridge. You never stayed out till 7:30 of an evening in Pentridge. It's totally different.
Well, in Australia, there are some very significant differences in the operation of the private prisons than in the United States. For a start, nationally, 20% of our prison cells are now in the hands of private operators, whereas in the United States it's certainly less than 5%.
US-based companies, Corrections Corporation of America and Wackenhut Corrections, dominate the market. They run through their subsidiaries Corrections Corporation of Australia and Australasian Correctional Management. A third UK-based company, Group 4, also manages, builds and designs prisons in Australia.
Victoria is actually engaged in an extraordinary experiment in privatisation. We've thrown ourselves into it with more gusto than any other area of the world. We've now got, I think we're now over 50% of the prisoners in custody in Victoria are privatised. And it's not just the prisons that are privatised. The holding cells are being privatised, prisoner transport is being privatised. All of the health and educational services for prisoners are apt to be provided by private service providers. The entire system is being moved out of public control into the private realm.
One of the factors which causes there to be an open door, really, for people urging privatisation is the vast expansion in prison populations that has occurred in many parts of the world.
What we're seeing in Victoria is part of a nationwide trend. The law and order agenda is whipped up by politicians. It's easy for them to sell around election time. They don't have to solve the real problems, they just have to beat the law and order drum.
Where do you stand on mandatory
sentencing? 3 strikes and you are in. What the community wants as well is punishment.
The Aboriginal Legal Service stood up for this bloke.
Being kept by our money.
Of law and order is
Both
one
sides of politics deny they're trying to outbid each other on law and order.
There should be no second chance.
Crime policy is full of all sorts of unsustainable claims. One of them is that high rates of imprisonment reduce crime. They don't.
In Victoria, we have one of the lowest crime rates in Australia, but still the number of people going into prison is increasing dramatically.
Jeff Kennett says protecting the community...
You do the crime, you do the time.
Have already walked the 3 strikes.
That's one trigger.
They're going to be tough. People will have the book thrown at them.
This means that states simply have to provide more very expensive prison beds, and they've asked the private sector to take on this task.
So we've got two what I really consider to be fundamentally negative trends: increasing number of people going before the courts, being imprisoned, and a ready supply of transnational multinational corporations who will build more prisons.
This is a wonderful place. It's got wonderful potential. Everybody that didn't know anything said, oh, you know, they're only out to get a good return for their shareholders and they don't mind starving the people. And I was scared stiff of them. And I congratulate CCA, but I don't know what we're going to do with this overcrowding.
Since the private prisons have been introduced, the prison population in Australia has increased dramatically. There's been a 48% in the prison population in Australia since 1986. And the remand population, those people awaiting trial as yet innocent, not proved to be guilty, has increased by 75% over that period of time.
This, provided it's not extended, is my vision splendid. I decided years ago that we needed a one-level prison with plenty of grounds and being able to accommodate up to 125 people, up to. But of course now they're just storing people. It's like packing sardines into tins. It is no use storing people. To start with, they don't stand still. Secondly, if you let them think, they think too much. And so you've got to be very careful that you look after these people. It's not a case of just storing away bodies.
My name's Jennifer Hay. I'm in here for for drug use and possession, basically heroin and bank fraud and deception.
Thank you.
This is my 5th time, yeah, which isn't anything to be proud of.
Thanks, Alan. See you later.
Protection unit's full. We've got 20 beds and there's 40 women in here, so we're doubled up at the moment. I ended up here
in protection because I was abused by 4 girls out in mainstream and bashed really bad. The girls are in protection mainly for the same reasons. You know, the girls have had boiling hot water poured over them, their hair cut off right to their scalp, stab wounds to them. One nearly died because they stabbed her with a knife and punctured her lungs. They've had cups smashed in their faces, things like this, and they're scared.
There is a much higher level of violence out at the private women's prison than there was at the public women's prison. It's a very big place with very few prison officers on it. Even though there are 55 cameras looking over the 150 women in there, the violence happens because there aren't officers there to deal with it.
You just don't have the capacity to hear, to observe problems arising, such as someone who becomes suicidal or someone who's being victimised by more powerful and aggressive prisoners. Particularly if you've introduced new staff who've got very limited experience of working in a prison environment.
Education will be starting in the next couple of weeks. I really like education. We used to be able to go up to the actual education building, which is held in mainstream, but there's been a really bad riot between mainstream and protection, and ever since then we're not allowed to leave the unit except for work. The prisoners run this jail. The management don't run this jail. They don't have a clue what they're doing. And I know it's not their fault, it's just that they're all new officers. They're a normal person off the street who just gets thrown into 6 weeks of training. So they don't really know, like, how girls get their drugs in and what goes on behind closed doors. They're not aware of it all because they haven't been through the system like, you know, I mean, a few of them have, but not many of them know. So basically it's just run by the girls. They get away with everything out there in mainstream.
The companies actually went to great lengths to ensure that they didn't employ former state prison officers from any of the correctional facilities that have been closed for fear that they were publicly running around stating they didn't want to bring any of that culture into their jail. They wanted to be new and vibrant and a whole lot of things. But effectively it was trying to bring about a situation where there wasn't a culture of unionisation that developed within the jail.
If something does go drastically wrong in here today, withdraw yourself from the centre. Get to the gatehouse or get to a safe area. Yeah.
Overnight, there has been another escape from the units, from 2 of the units. This facility's been opening since 1996, and it's just been a series, one after the other, of violent incidents. The staff have come to a point where they can no longer operate under the conditions of overcrowding, under the conditions of the staff numbers being as low as they are and placing themselves in jeopardy.
In the early days, just after they were opening, it became pretty clear to us that the companies had under-tendered to get the contract. Most of that involved running the place at the bare minimum number of staff that they thought they could get away with to make the place work.
On Wednesday night, tempers flared. About
46 prisoners barricaded themselves in a recreation area.
50 inmates armed with knives and makeshift weapons took control.
Staff numbers.
The riot was sparked by inmates unhappy with prison conditions.
The rampage follows a spate of drug overdoses and suicides.
When the riot happened at Port Phillip, the Crims are locked down. They lit toilet rolls, started to fire. It was night shift, so there was only 4 or 5 on the whole prison, 600 prisoners in the jail.
They've just had enough of the shit food, visitors being turned back, babies being strip searched, just not being straightforward with it.
So then they set fire to the wheelie bins, breaking legs, wooden legs off chairs inside, dipping it into the heated plastic. It was obviously on fire, and they're in the yard, and they're actually launching it at the prison staff, and they attacked the fire brigade who had arrived to actually fight the fire.
We're trying to protect ourselves against anything, you know, we're on our last legs here.
As emergency crews stood by, inmates attempted to negotiate via the media.
After 6 hours, negotiators brought the standoff to a peaceful end. 38 inmates were transferred to other prisons, while the 8 alleged ringleaders were placed in solitary confinement.
We are at the moment doing a good job, and we are confident that over the months and the years, the quality of the service we provide will increase.
If the government does not act now to take control of this prison, there will be more deaths, whether it be prisoners, whether it be staff.
Following the riot, most of the negotiations that occurred between the union and management of the jail was about the minimum number that we thought were required to have the place run safely.
Prison officers at Port Phillip have received only 2 weeks training, whereas in the state system they get approximately 12 weeks. So we need to look at the sort of training that prison officers have got in terms of their duty of care of people who are held in that prison. We also understand that they've got less staff than state-run prisons.
Not long after the riot, Group 4 actually wrote to the state government requesting an injection of funds that they were seeking to help them run the prison, primarily because of the requirement to put on the extra staff and because of the training, the rates of pay that we were demanding. It was going to cost them this much to do it, and would the government help them out?
Those of us on the outside who are trying to make sure that these prisons run relatively humanely, if we don't have the information to know what's going on, then we can't make them accountable. Now we've got the government closing the shutters on what's happening inside the private prisons that they're trying to protect, so we can be spending months in court cases trying to get the information out of them.
The Coburg and Brunswick legal centres are trying to obtain internal reports on custodial deaths and other incidents, which until now have been refused.
They tried to say that they were commercially confidential issues, and all of our resources were used fighting the 3 biggest law firms in Australia, who are representing the 3 largest private prison companies in the world. That information was there before, and just because they'd privatised is no reason why we shouldn't have had that same information again.
Today, this VCAT decision sends a strong message to the government that this secrecy and arrogance will not be tolerated.
It's understood when riots occur or when prisoners die in custody, private prisons can be up for substantial fines under their contract with the state government. Critics say this leads to incidents and evidence being swept under the carpet in order to protect profits.
There's a particularly notorious example in relation to the Port Phillip prison in Victoria, where an inmate actually headbutted a wall intentionally in order to obtain medications. And the Auditor General reported back on that was classified by the private sector operator as an accident. Well, it wasn't, clearly. What it was a self-induced mutilation. It was actually a self-induced injury. And we've got to question really whether the counting of incidences are being skewed one way or another, because it might reflect poorly on the performance of a private contractor.
We had been interested in the Port Phillip prison because it was a private prison, because we had gone and inspected the prison and had some concerns about it. I remember walking in and seeing the horizontal bars and the showers, shower rail, the shower fittings, and just looking at all the hanging points. It was so obvious.
I said, why did you give them such a good suicidal point? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you've given them a lovely place to hang themselves.
One of the officers who was taking us around said that it was because they had had some requirement imposed on them that the prison wasn't to look like a prison. George Drinkin hung himself on the 30th of October. He was the first death in Port Phillip by hanging. He hung himself on a shower rail, one of the hanging points that we had identified.
The police come to the door, it was about midnight, round about midnight.
20 past 12.
20 past 12. They came in and said, he's dead, ring this number. That's all that was said. So George tried to ring the number all night and we couldn't get anyone till about 6:30 in the morning, wasn't it?
It's 7 o'clock, I think.
7 o'clock.
Just before 7.
And we just packed the car and just come down to Victoria and done what we had to do.
When we got there, no one knew what was going on. Went out and got George's belongings in a big box and that, and basically said, that's it.
I don't know how they treated other families, but they treated us pretty bad. He was just told to us he was the property of the coroner, and that was it. When they were finished with him, we could have him.
When the issue about the hanging points was first raised, it was really the private prison company was saying that it was too expensive to remove the hanging points. If people wanted them removed, then the government would have to cough up with the money. That struck us as amazing because, you know, they had been contracted to provide a professional service and they had failed. You know, we wonder about the government's involvement in that. Obviously, they had to commission the prison and sign off on the designs. There will now be a coronial inquest. The family will have representation at that, and they've asked us to represent them.
Because he was on so many different prescribed medications, and then they were just increasing them rather than deal with any of the issues that he was taking the drugs for.
And the prison officer clearly knows something's wrong with when does the onus fall on them to say, look, I think he's a risk?
I want to know how many other prisoners are at risk on that day in that unit.
So experience, training and numbers.
We've been left pretty well in the dark by everyone except for Pauline. She's the only one that's given us any information of to what's happening and where, because no one else has bothered to let us know anything.
G'day Margaret, how you going?
Good, Pauline, how are you?
How's your drive down? Hi George.
Good, thanks.
Good? Come on in.
So all the people that wanted
Don't
jobs...
you remember the Drinkins? George and Margaret? Hi, how are you?
They hoped it was going to go away. They hoped it was going to be swept under the carpet. They didn't think anyone would pursue this.
We're doing lots of research about cell design, about staff training, about suicide and self-harm. And we're getting all sorts of different studies and stuff together, and we're going to provide all that in bulk to the coroner and say, well, look, here's some information that might help you, the coroner, to work out what the issues are. It seems from the autopsy that there's some indication that George had been dead for some time when they found him. Yeah. So it's no, not possible. I don't think they could have resuscitated him when they cut him down.
No.
Yeah.
No.
What can you do? What can you do?
It's hard.
I'll be right.
Get there. When I saw the hanging points there for the first time before the prisoners were even there, I thought, well, when someone dies, they're going to have to do something about it. Then they'll learn their lesson, but it will be very sad. It will take one death. You know, 1 death, 2 deaths, 3 deaths, 4 deaths, and nothing was happening. They were still saying it's teething problems, it was too expensive, and meanwhile people were just dying one after the other.
You've got to try and put your life in front of you and keep living your life. You know, you can't give up. And the only way we find now is we've got to pursue the matter further and try and help improve the system somewhere along the line.
This isn't just an issue for Victoria. We've got other states in Australia now looking at privatisation. Other states really have to look at Victoria and learn from the mistakes that we've made.
The more I look at this design, the more I am impressed with it. I think we've really outdone ourselves on this. The government wanted a unique solution to fit the specific problems that they needed addressed here. And I think we've done that extremely well. we are able to bring to bear a wealth of experience in corrections by virtue of the fact that the American correction system is so large compared to most of the correction systems in the world. This is what we bring. We bring that accumulated expertise. As you know, it's always been our philosophy that we want to be a good neighbor. We want to be a resource to the community. We want to have good relations and be a strong part of the community and build those kinds of trust and create that mutual feeling between ourselves and the people in the community that will serve everyone well through the years.
Yes, I think that's important.
Very pleased with what we have here. Corrections Corporation of America has experienced significant growth, between 25 and 30%. Governments have been strapped for cash. They have turned to the private sector, who can not only offer reduced cost in operations, but can also offer the capital that's required in order to build the fixed assets. It looks like they're coming along pretty well on this site work out here. It looks like they've got some of the building pads in. How are they coming on that?
Pretty good, guy.
I like the way that this is working in with the topography of the land here. Where we're building these, no matter what country it is, the construction is all done pretty much the same way. You just can't beat this view that we have across here.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful. That would be $1 million view if it was a resort.
The Australian operations are very important to us. It took us a while to break in, but we have done well, and we have been getting more and more business.
Where can